Okay. Hello, everybody. Time being 5:39, I would like to call the Economic Development Subcommittee meeting with the Steering Committee for the Franklin for All zoning project to order, the April 6th meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that we will be using civil discourse and show respect to each other throughout this meeting. All citizens are welcome to attend public board and committee meetings in person. Additionally, in an effort to maximize citizen engagement opportunities, citizens will be able to continue to participate remotely via phone or Zoom, which I think is awesome. And the meetings will also be live streamed by Franklin TV and shown on Comcast, Channel 11, and Verizon, Channel 29. The link to the meeting is in the agenda, which is on the website. The call-in number is 1-929-205-6099. It's on your screen. The meeting ID number is 819-1598-9759, and then press the pound number. So thank you all for being here. Oh, I'd like to also let you know that other people might be recording this. Just to make sure that you understand that, I think probably Steve Franklin Radio might be out there and Zoom. First, I just want to quickly let you all know that in the chambers, I have Councilor Sheridan, Jones, and Frangillo with me. I have Greg Rondo and Beth Whirling from the Planning Board, and Bruce Hunchard from the Zoning Board of Appeals could not make it tonight. I would like to thank the 600 people who took the survey. The Franklin for All survey. I think that's amazing. 600 people. Thanks everyone for your comments that you've been sending me, for going to the forum and all your emails. It's just been, it's great to have participation like this. So without further ado, I believe that we have an update from MAPC for the Franklin for All zoning reform project for Franklin Center, including downtown commercial districts and surrounding neighborhoods. And Emma is going to give us an update on the survey information. Emma.
Great, thank you. Let me just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
We can't really hear you very well right now, though.
You can't hear me?
There, now I can.
Okay, I'll try to talk into my computer. Thank you for welcoming me back. The focus of our meeting today is obviously going to be recapping the survey results. We're also going to hear from the Director of Data Services, Tim Reardon, who's here with me at MAPC, and he's going to explain the methodology around the Mbta communities analysis in terms of kind of what DHCD is requiring. And, you know, this also sort of feeds into a more general build out analysis that we would do for the study area that takes into account any zoning recommendations we would be moving forward. Ooh. Sorry. So our survey was open for a little less than a month, and it was actually completed by 682 people who submitted results.
Awesome.
Which is fantastic. Not everybody answered every question, but 682 people answered, you know, some of the questions. Some people obviously filled out the entire thing, and over 800 people actually access the survey because the survey basically just flags the IP address of everyone who visits the page. And so I still think that's a number worth mentioning, because even if not everybody filled it out, they still could have learned something from it and just been informed by the process. So that's why I'm mentioning it. And the majority of people who completed the survey did not attend our public forum, though I'm pretty sure almost everybody who attended the forum, either online or in person, went and filled out the survey, because 246 people said that they did attend or they watched it. One of the first things that we asked on the survey was how familiar folks feel with zoning as a general topic, but also more specifically how, they understand zoning and its impact in Franklin. And something I think is interesting, kind of across the board, the most responses were for somewhat, so not very, very, well known in terms of some of the intricacies, but generally have a good idea of what zoning means. But something I think is interesting is that people felt more familiar with zoning as a general concept than in Franklin in their own community. And I just think that speaks to, the work that we're doing here. And as we start putting in our recommendations and also showing things more visually through the build out analysis, hopefully we can give people more of an idea of what zoning really looks like in their community. We asked people about the study area and if we were capturing the right locations, and the vast majority of people think that we are on the right track and we're looking at the right places. For people who answered no, there was sort of a mix of people who either felt like the area was too small and should include maybe some of the areas along East or West Central Street further out, either to just kind of increase mixed-use development and density in those commercial districts, but also to potentially redevelop strip malls in those areas. A number of people who said no didn't really answer the question. They just sort of use it as an opportunity to explain that they're not interested in anything changing in the community. But I'm pretty encouraged by the number of people who feel like we are looking at the right places. And there was definitely a mix of opinions about whether the study area should just sort of focus entirely on the immediate downtown commercial district, and potentially the C1 district, or include sort of the broader area. So that was kind of a mix bag of the people who said no. We asked people to imagine their ideal version of Franklin Center in the future and to write down 5 words that describe this future. Since we had so many words, it basically filtered out everything that was said. It included everything, all the words that were mentioned at least 5 times. So at least all these words were mentioned at least 5 times and some many more. So obviously the big one that kind of pops out is walkable, followed by parking, vibrant, accessible, restaurants, diverse, safe. And then there's some other words that got a lot of responses too. And so this word cloud sort of just allows you to see the differences in those responses visually. We asked people to indicate how important they felt a number of priorities were. And people were able to say if they thought that was an important priority, just something that could be good, but nice, nice to have, but not super important, and then unimportant or not sure. So, by far, the biggest responses were around supporting, having it be important that we support existing businesses, create opportunities for new businesses, provide new public spaces for people to sit and gather, and simplify regulations to make them easier for owners to understand. And housing is kind of more towards the bottom of the list here. So I think we'll need to keep talking and sort of reconcile how we balance our different priorities with what people are indicating here. For each of the districts that are in the study area, we asked people to weigh in both on what types of housing typologies they would want to see, and also the kinds of commercial land uses that they think would make sense. So for the downtown commercial district, in terms of housing types, by far we're seeing people wanting to see mixed use buildings. That's not surprising. Higher density buildings, but with commercial options on the first floor to sort of, and contribute to vibrancy in the study area, specifically in the downtown core. A lot of people want to see, on the commercial end, more shops, restaurants and bars, art galleries, artisanal and craft maker spaces. So just this kind of destinations that people in the town would want to go to, but also are things that can kind of draw in people from other communities. The answers for the commercial 1 district are fairly similar. We're still seeing mixed use as the top priority in terms of housing types, though, a pretty decent number of people also would, be comfortable with sort of seeing either smaller or larger multifamily buildings there, which essentially reflects, what the area is zoned for now. In terms of land uses that are commercial, top one here actually is offices, but we land pretty closely on a lot of the other categories in terms of enthusiasm. So service-related businesses, grocery stores, fitness, gyms, I think the kind of places that if you were living in the downtown, you would probably want easy access to, because it just might enable you to not have to drive as far, and, just sort of allows you to not have to leave the district. For the general residential 5 district, there's definitely sort of a different skew in terms of the results. So the top housing type for this district was 2-family homes, followed by single-family, townhomes, cottage-style housing, and 3-family homes. And, with the exception of single-family homes, I would say all those other types fall into what we call like the missing middle housing types. So things that are a lot less denser than, a larger multifamily building, and might be able to sort of fit within the context of a lower density neighborhood, but could lead to some incremental increases in density. For commercial uses, there was definitely less responses just overall about these, but artisanal craft maker spaces was the top one, followed by restaurants and bars and grocery stores. We're almost there. The next one is the single family residential district, and not surprising, people feel like the housing typology that makes the most sense there is single family homes, followed by cottage style housing, which often ends up sort of taking the form of a single family home, but you would cluster units sort of in slightly closer proximity, and you might, cluster them around common open space. So again, it still can kind of fit into that lower density typology, but allow a little bit more units than just the single family zoning. And then for commercial uses, again, not a lot of responses here. I think people see this kind of as a residential district that should stay that way. But things like craft and maker spaces and grocery stores are some of the higher ones mentioned. And then lastly, the mixed business and innovation district. In terms of housing, people thought that mixed use buildings could make sense there, smaller multifamily buildings, townhomes, and definitely a sentiment that that area should, continue to support commercial uses like offices, business incubators, co-working spaces, craft maker spaces, essentially what it has been zoned for currently. For each of those districts, we asked people to weigh in on their thoughts about density. So basically, is the density just right? Can the area support more people? Is it too dense? Or, I'm not sure. And so for the downtown commercial district, most people feel that the area can and should have more density. Same in the commercial 1 district, though not quite as high a number, and followed by the next most common response, which is that the density is just right. So definitely people in the minority thinking that those areas are already too dense. For the general residential 5 district, most people feel like the density is about right, with the next most common response being that the area is already too dense. And then for the single family residential district, by far, most people think that the density is just right, again, followed by, or it's too dense. So not necessarily wanting to see more density there. And then for the mixed business and innovation district, by far the most common response there was that this is an area, currently it has really no people living in it, but it's an area that could and should have more density. We asked people their sentiment around building design, and we gave a couple options like traditional, modern, but we also let people tell us if they don't care as much about what the actual architectural design is, more just they care that it's being designed well. And so not surprisingly, most people think that Franklin's, new buildings should still have that traditional look that can allow them to fit in well with some of the older buildings that are in the districts. And so that is definitely something that we keep in mind. Moving forward, in terms of some of the people who said other responses, a lot of the responses were more about just needing to have kind of an appropriate form and massing in terms of the site and where it's located, and kind of less so about the actual architectural design standards. We didn't give an option for a mix of both, and so I'm curious kind of how this might have turned out if we had put that in as an option. But some of the people who gave other responses basically said that Franklin already has a mix of architectural styles, and so it sort of makes sense to blend those more modern and traditional aesthetics. Folks weighed in on with some suggestions around using a mix of setbacks, potentially having like a more traditional ground floor level with maybe more contemporary styles on the stories above, in areas where people aren't kind of directly looking at them when they're interacting on the street. And just generally making sure that any new designs are respectful of the small town feel and historic character that really defines Franklin Center. And we also got a number of comments here just around the need to be thinking about sustainability and energy efficiency in building design. Parking is obviously a big concern. A lot of people feel like there's not enough parking, and I think the data kind of is you could read it different ways in terms of kind of what the results of the parking studies say. But most of the people here definitely felt like they were okay with a little bit of a walk, 3 to 5 minutes from a parking spot to their destination. So they don't necessarily need to be right in front of the building, but I think it's more just about people knowing that they can go to the district and find a place to park. So they're willing to park a little bit farther if they know they could still get a spot there, which just sort of speaks to like maybe considering a centralized parking solution, or just thinking more about that as we kind of craft our recommendations. People spoke about their desire to walk and travel freely in the area, but they don't necessarily feel comfortable with that, and so would want there to be more pedestrian and bike safety improvements sort of around Franklin Center in order for them to feel more comfortable. A lot of comments about the need for a parking garage in the downtown to support local businesses and allow more people to take the commuter rail. And lastly, comments around the need to be really thinking thoughtfully around ADA accessibility for new curbing, parking, sidewalks, and also more generally at the Mbta station, which is obviously not owned by the town, but definitely affects the people who live there and are traveling from there. We allowed people to give some other comments about what they think the look and feel of Franklin Center should be. And a lot of these responses were sort of reflective of other questions that we had asked, but the prominent theme was really just people looking for retail and leisure shopping and dining, and people want to be able to hang out in their downtown and not have to leave the community in order to access those services. A quote that I liked that I think sort of describes what we want to do here well. People don't often know what they want until they have it. We might not enjoy change, but we all enjoy walkable, vibrant places with continuous storefront, interesting buildings, and walk/bike infrastructure. And again, we heard some more comments around here in terms of the green energy standards. And so thinking about electric buildings, either in terms of requiring it or incentivizing it in order to reduce greenhouse gas dependency. Sorry. greenhouse gas causing material dependency. So the last section of the survey was around strengths and challenges and opportunities. So some of the strengths that we heard are that the downtown is a good size. It's not too big or too small. There's a train station that provides access into Boston. The area has a small town feel and historic character. People love like the events and festivals that bring people into the downtown. Generally, I think there are always ways to improve walkability, but people feel like it's pretty good, for a more suburban community. And some of the places that were commonly mentioned are, really these destinations that contribute to vibrancy. So the library, the Black Box, the Irish Pub, and also just having Dean College there. It's a beautiful campus, and it definitely contributes to all that Franklin has to offer. We definitely heard some sentiment here around people liking things just the way they are. They don't want Franklin to turn into a large Metro West community or Boston. So, that sentiment is there, and I think we definitely want to make clear that any of our zoning recommendations are not intended to, make Franklin Boston or a larger Metro West community. They're going to be contextually sensitive and, appropriate based on the feedback we've received. In terms of challenge, the number one thing was lack of parking or perceived lack of parking, lack of stores and casual eateries, lack of nightlife. Some people feel like there are areas of downtown that are kind of run down and might benefit from sprucing up. People mentioned that commercial rents are just too high to allow small businesses to move in, and this contributes to vacancies and also, the character and, the type of businesses that end up being in the downtown, because, banks, those kind of businesses are always going to be able to afford the rents, but the smaller mom and pop stores that really make Franklin unique are definitely affected. And, there's very little available affordable housing. And that is in terms of both deed restricted affordable housing that is required to be rented to a certain population at a certain income level, but also just housing that is affordable, like lowercase a. We normally capitalize affordable housing when we're referring to deed restricted housing, but we also mean just sort of naturally occurring affordable properties that, maybe it was a property that people could afford for a long time, but the building gets sold and the new person's going to raise the rent, and all of a sudden that unit is no longer affordable to those who need it. We got some great ideas around opportunities. One thing that was mentioned a few times is just establishing greater connections with Dean College, having greater connectivity between them and the town, and are there ways that the public could have better access to some of their amenities. A desire to convert existing downtown businesses to retail and casual dining. I heard a lot about the need to just make use of the vacant space that is there. More comments around sustainable features, not just in terms of the building efficiency, but also green infrastructure for stormwater management, having bike racks, making EV charging stations available, etc. Kind of the need to diversify business and entertainment options, so there are just more kind of places to go and different types of activities to participate in. And then providing greater placemaking options for teens and families, places where they can go and they can hang out and feel safe, but still be in an appropriate kind of hangout area that's not getting in the way of other people. We asked people to identify what other communities, both in the region and elsewhere, have great downtowns that we should be looking towards for some inspiration. So we basically inputted all the feedback that we got into our word counter, and so the ones that were mentioned the most were Hudson and Wellesley, at 45 mentions for Hudson, 44 mentions for Wellesley, followed by Falmouth, Natick, Norwood, Needham, Concord, Newburyport, Medfield, etc. And so all of these, are pretty small towns. I don't know exactly how their populations compare to Franklin, but we're definitely thinking about others. People are identifying kind of other suburban communities, not really higher density places. The last part of our survey was just to probe how people sort of identify themselves, and we do that so we can compare that data with what the metrics are kind of for Franklin as a whole, and that just allows us to see, are we reaching the right populations, and are there other areas that, are there gaps that we need to be thinking about as we do future engagement, to ensure that we're sort of having an equitable approach. So in terms of living situation, the vast majority of participants own their home. This number is actually a bit larger than the percentage overall for Franklin. I think that's about 80% of people own their home versus renting. And in terms of what kind of house people live in, the vast majority live in a single family home. Few people live in duplexes or other typologies, but the most respondents live in single family homes. And again, I think that number is a bit bigger than the number of single family homes kind of as a percentage of all the units in Franklin as a whole. We ask people their age, and so we sort of have this nice bell curve to show, though, these numbers aren't all that reflective of the community as a whole, which isn't surprising. We wouldn't expect a whole lot of teenagers to participate in this process, even though there's quite a few of them in in Franklin. So that clearly skews the numbers a bit, but the most people, usually this is sort of the case, people who are homeowners and are sort of really invested in the community, and what the future of that area looks like, whereas younger people might be sort of thinking about other things. We asked people to describe their racial and ethnic identity. Again, the vast majority of people who participated identify as white, followed by other, and so what I'm guessing that is mostly people who identify as mixed race. We didn't give people the option to use that. Instead, we said they could check all the racial and ethnic identities that they identify with. And so I'm assuming that that's what mostly that number is, people who said there's no option for mixed race, but that's what I am. We asked people how many people live in the household, and by far the most common responses were either 2-people households or 4-person households, and this is pretty similar to what the breakdown is for Franklin as a whole. We also asked people how long they've lived in Franklin, and a little less than half of people who completed the survey have lived here for over 21 years. So people obviously have long-term investments in the community, and so they are really curious and want to be informed about what is happening here. But I still am encouraged by the number of people who filled out the survey but have only lived in the town for 0 to 2 years, or less than 10 years, because those are still pretty good numbers. And then lastly, we asked people if they live in the Franklin Center study area. So more than 2/3 of people do not. And one thing I think I would be interested in doing some more data analysis on, we sort of process the data as quickly as we can, because we just closed the survey. on Friday in order to get it in front of you today. But, I think some further analysis we could do is kind of just see what the survey results were for people in the study area, who live in the study area and are most likely to be impacted by these changes, and see if that how that compares with the town, or the respondents as a whole. And, we can also think about if there are other sort of metrics we want to do further analysis based on, to see if that yields any different kinds of results. All right, well, that is the end of my spiel. So I'm now going to, unless you have any sort of immediate questions, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Reardon to talk about the MBTA communities analysis that we are looking at for Franklin, and sort of what future considerations we should be thinking about as we think about compliance with this new mandate.
Okay, Emma, I just wanted to allow the steering committee here to ask you any questions about the survey while we have it fresh in our minds, because there's a lot of information there. Hopefully
Yes.
we'll be getting that presentation so we can actually look through it and then come up with some more questions for you. And
Absolutely. And we are also going to be putting it more of like in a narrative memo that we'll share with the community too.
Excellent,
It's
excellent.
really clear what people
Okay,
say.
so I'm going to ask, does anyone have any questions? Councilor Frangillo?
Yeah, my main question, just going in, which is sort of knowing the answer, but are we expecting this to be a representative sample of Franklin as a whole? And I think you made it clear that we're not, and that it's skewed wealthier, older
Homeowners, yeah.
Yeah. Which I feel like is important. And the other piece that, in terms of context, how many focus groups did we?
Sure. So I think that's a really good sort of caveat that, usually participants are more likely to be white, homeowners, wealthier. Like that's just kind of what we expect in most urban planning processes, just because that's kind of how it's always been. So I'm not really surprised by these results, but I think it points to the importance of those focus group conversations that we held. So we had one with developers, we had another with business and property owners, another with service providers, who are working with people who are kind of struggling with housing issues, and also a residents focus group, which was mostly with people who live in the study area. So I think that kind of gives some good contextual data. There are certainly ways for future engagement that we can try to target some of these other populations, but sometimes you kind of have to have those more like one-on-one conversations to reach those groups.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
So I was just going to ask, I think it's a great idea to look through the answers for the people that live in the area. I think that's really important because these are the people that could potentially be affected the most, and
Yep.
and it would be interesting to me to see that data. I don't know if you're going to be able to tease that out, but that would be
Yeah, I mean,
very
we could
important.
just sort of filter, the responses by people who live in the community. It requires definitely some time to do the analysis, but I think that is something that we could certainly include in that narrative memo we put together. So
Excellent.
basically, if there's anything, any of the data that doesn't match up, so for some of the things, it might be consistent across all the responses, but if there are areas where it doesn't match up, we could flag those and show that breakdown.
Great, thank you. I think, is there any other questions on the steering committee? I think we're all set. I think we want to get a chance to actually read through everything.
Absolutely, yeah.
Before we come up with too many questions, but I think there's a question out in the audience. It's iPad 2. Is that right, Amy?
They have their hand up.
Okay.
Hi, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. So I guess my first question, actually my only question, is really addressed to Kobe, who just spoke. So one, I own a house in Franklin, and two, I am far from wealthy. So I guess I'm a bit concerned that you're kind of throwing out all of what the 400 and something people took the time to fill out this form. So I guess my question is like, where does it end? Where does the input from people who truly don't care? Like, why are you going to go out and solicit more input? There was more than enough time. This was all over Facebook for the past month. I know specifically, I sent it out to about 50 people I know. So I guess I'd like you, Kobe, to answer why you're saying like, oh, you know, the wealthier. I am not wealthy. I own my own home. I own my businesses. I do what I need to do. So if you could elaborate on your take on wealthier and the lower income. I mean, everyone had access to this presentation and to this, whatever, the survey online.
Okay,
I guess
I'm gonna interrupt you just for a second.
That's fine.
To ask you, before Councilor Frangillo answers, I was just wondering if you could give us your name and your address, since all it says is iPad 2.
Personally, no. I'm sorry. I do that on purpose. I live in Franklin. I've been here for 13 years. I have 2 children in the school system. I get ridiculed every day on Facebook because I do not agree with a lot of the stuff that the town is trying to do. So I would like the councilman or selectman to actually answer the question.
Well, we would like to know if you,
We can't,
okay, all right.
we can't.
What?
answer their question. We can't, ma'am, this is Glenn Jones, the clerk of the Franklin Town Council. We can't field questions from the public without knowing the public we're speaking to, for the simple fact that it's policy of the town council and it's policy of our public open meeting law.
Okay, well then, here you go. My name is Jennifer Clark. I live at 53 Crocker Avenue in Franklin. I moved here on May 1st of 2012. Do you need anything else, Mr. Jones?
No, ma'am, just clarification, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, definitely want to hear Kobe's reply to wealthier people, and I am not wealthy, but I do own my own home. So please specify what you're speaking about and why these individuals who didn't do the survey should really have a say. I mean, I took the time along with, 800 and whatever, some other people. I didn't have to do that, but I did. You know why? Because I think it's important. So help me understand.
I'll let Kobe respond because I know you want to
Yeah,
hear
no,
from
please
him.
do. Thank you.
But I can tell you that from, my agency, we work with a lot of communities, and generally, a lot of the harder to reach populations are people who are people of color, who are people who aren't making as much money, are renters. So it's really just about how are the demographics of people responding to the survey matching up to the people who live in Franklin in order to be
So,
inclusive.
okay, that's fine, Emma. I totally agree with you, but where does it end? Like, we took the time as adults to go onto this form and fill it out.
So
correct?
we're not changing any of the results of this survey.
I just
We're
want
not.
Kobe to answer why he's more concerned with making sure, like I've stated already, I'm not wealthy. My husband and I both work full time. Like, we took the time to fill out this form. He made it very clear that this does not take into
Jen?
everybody in
Hey,
Franklin.
Jen?
So, okay,
Jen?
you know what, Kobe, either answer it or don't. Thank you.
Okay. Kobe? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. It was, the survey is what it is. I was more a question of context, right? In order to understand the survey results, we need to recognize that it's not intending to be a representative sample of the community, right? We had an opportunity to provide input, and it's going to be the many ways that people are going to be able to provide input on the topic. These numbers are not to say that 40% of Franklin believes this. Rather, it's 40% of the respondents believe this, and it's important to recognize the context of those respondents. Certainly, not everyone who answered this is wealthy and a single-family homeowner or anything like that.
Yeah, we actually didn't even ask about income.
Sure. But recognizing that there's a likely, that it's likely not representative of the town is important context in understanding the survey results.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Counselor Frangillo. I think there's one other question out there. What is that?
Janet.
Janet D. Could you state your name and your address, please?
Sure, this is Janet Dewsnap. I'm at 7 Tyson Road.
Okay, go ahead. You have a question?
Great, it's actually not a question, it's really more of a comment. As I was filling in the survey, I was, especially the questions about parking. I know from previous discussions about parking in the center that there's a focus really on patrons and people coming to the businesses and finding parking. But I think there's maybe not enough emphasis or not enough attention given to, not only the residents, but the businesses that operate in the center, that many businesses have people who have to be there for 8+ hours a day. And there's limited parking for those people unless they actually live within walking distance of the center. And right now, unless there's dedicated parking for those businesses, people that may have more than a couple of employees, it's very challenging. And they probably have to walk 10 to 15 minutes to find, parking where there's not a 2-hour limit or a parking meter or something like that.
Right.
So I just wanted to make a comment more than anything.
That's a great comment, Janet, and I think Administrator Helen has an answer. He wants to say something to you, okay?
Yeah,
Jamie?
Through you, Madam Chair. To Janet, really quickly, how are you, Janet? I'm Jamie, the Town Administrator. Actually, there are merchant dedicated spots downtown in our bylaw. I'll give the cheap plug. We have, actually, the lot behind Dean Bank is a municipal-owned lot. It is not all owned by the MBTA. The MBTA owns the bottom portion, and the town owns the upper portion, in addition to approximately 12 or 24 spaces off Emmons Street, which literally have signage up saying merchant-only parking. In our town code, we have a bylaw that has, I believe, 24 merchant dedicated spaces and roughly 60 or 70 other commuter spaces. I can assure everyone that a large portion of those spaces are not being used today. Obviously, the pandemic has wreaked havoc on commuters, and many of the merchants who used to buy passes don't anymore. So there are a lot of passes for people to purchase. I will note that the Franklin Police Department is doing, after this Franklin for All zoning exercise, we'll be conducting another analysis of pay-by-phone options and some other parking to look at our town bylaw in the post-pandemic world to see what are the rates, what are the needs, what are the uses. And I would expect at some point later this fall there'd be a more robust discussion on the parking. But if you go to the Franklin Police Department webpage, there is a link right there called Parking Permit Lottery Application. In the old days, before the pandemic, you needed a lottery because there was a lot of demand. We don't need a lottery anymore. You can literally just call up and order your own space. I hope that helps, Janet.
It does help, and in fact, I guess I wonder how many at the town hall know that, because I actually called and inquired about this very thing and was told, actually my question was, there's a parking space right in front of our business. It's a mixed use home that is also commercially zoned. But I asked for some kind of permit to park directly in front of the home, and we were told we cannot. And I said, well, are there any other options? And I was told no. So I would have loved to have known that from, I think I might have just called the town clerk's office or, and asked to be directed. So thank you. I appreciate it.
You bet, Janet. I will note, obviously I wasn't on the call, but the spaces that are on the street are definitely not parking spaces for more than 2 hours.
Right.
And the reason is
Yeah,
we
I
need a
understand that.
rotation of cars kind of going around, because everybody wants the space right in front of their house or their business. And then that we get into the trouble of the customers can't park in those spots. And this has been a time-honored tradition in Franklin well before I got here. But it's a short walk. It's only a few minutes in the background. And, you can call the Franklin Police Department. You can Google it. And there's a link there and a phone number if you're interested in a spot.
Thank you,
Thank
Jamie.
you very much.
Thank you, Janet. Also, we're going to talk about parking at the next EDC meeting, so everybody else can join us then.
Exactly.
Counselor Jones has one quick comment before we go to the MBTA communities analysis.
Yep. Janet, thanks for chiming in, by the way. Appreciate your comments. Just something I'd like to bring up. One of the things I'd like to point out, not only to this council, but to the MAPC, is that there is currently posted on our website, the Franklin Town website, in regards to a report that was published in 2006 that's called TOD, or in other words, Transit-Oriented Development. There's a 21-page final report that was done by the Cecil Group dating back to 2006, talking about many of the analysis of which they're currently undertaking. It would be probably a helpful tool for them to gather from data from, since they're pre-existing reports that we have under our development website. It's Franklin. I didn't know if you were privy or know of that report.
Yeah, I am definitely aware of it. I think I do have the report, or
Okay.
at least summaries of it. But,
Any useful information that we can provide would be good.
well, I mean, it has some really good ideas
It
in
does.
it.
Okay, I think we're,
Now we're just sort of in the implementing stage, right?
we're done with the survey
okay.
questions, and I think we can move on
All right.
to the MBTA communities
Kim, I
analysis.
think I'll
Great.
hand it over to you. Just let me know when you want me to switch slides.
All right, thank you so much, Emma. Thank you, Councilor Hamlin, and the other members of the committee for having us here tonight. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to participate in this conversation about the MBTA community's requirement and this very preliminary analysis that we've done on the ways, a couple options and sort of investigations of how Franklin could change its zoning in order to comply with this new requirement from the state. Emma, if you could go to the next slide, I'll give a brief overview of the MBTA Communities Program. So just for those of you who aren't aware, in the Economic Development Bond Bill that was adopted in January of 2021, it included a new zoning provision applying to 175 communities that are served by the MBTA. Including Franklin. Draft guidelines for that requirement were issued in late December of this year. The comment period closed at the end of March. And the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development anticipates issuing final guidelines at some point in late spring or early summer of this year. And we've been deeply involved in this issue, from providing support to housing and economic development as they develop those guidelines, commenting on them and analyzing them. And now I'm very excited about this opportunity to start testing out what would implementation of Section 3A compliant zoning look like in one of our communities, and especially in a community like Franklin, which is fairly well served by commuter rail, has a robust downtown, and clearly has a really engaged set of community stakeholders who are looking to rethink and reimagine what downtown Franklin is, while also maintaining all the things that make it great. I'll just say as an aside, I have a soft spot for Franklin because when I started at MAPC 19 years ago, my very first public meeting was at Dean College. And I've always loved the town, so it's a great opportunity to work on this. So a couple sort of key parameters that we want to keep in mind as the town thinks about how it could comply with the new zoning requirement. The guidelines set out what's called a minimum unit capacity for each municipality. It's based on different types of transit service that different communities receive. In Franklin's case, by receiving commuter rail service at its two stops, That means that the new zoning district or existing zoning districts should have a total unit capacity or minimum unit capacity of 15% of the existing townwide housing units, which translates to 1,883 units. And as we note below, that includes existing units. So you can rezone existing areas that already have existing units. It's not necessarily 883 net new units, but total capacity. And we'll kind of look at what that looks like in this analysis. The minimum gross density is 15 units per acre, and that's over the whole district, which can be subdivided, which can be sort of broken up into different sub-districts. One important thing to note is that the gross density, and this is in the legislation, unfortunately, so it's not something that can be changed in the guidelines. The gross density is calculated as the total unit capacity divided by the total land area in the district. Unit capacity can only be calculated for parcels that are in the zoning district and can be redeveloped. The total land area can include publicly owned parcels that can't be redeveloped. It includes roadway rights of way and other undevelopable areas. So it behooves every town to sort of try to draw their district as tightly as possible in order to kind of minimize the denominator of this 15 units per acre calculation. And it also means that the sort of nominal density of any district has to be more than 15 units per acre in order to meet that threshold. Like I said, the density can vary across subdistricts, and I'll show you some examples of that in this preliminary analysis. And 50% of the district has to be within a half mile of the commuter rail stop, which is not a problem because what we've done here is really focus on that downtown study area. A couple other things that I'll mention. I mean, one is that the definition of multifamily for purposes of this requirement is either 3 units in a structure or 2 structures with at least 2 units. And unfortunately, what that means is that some of those gentle density options that Emma had mentioned, for example, accessory dwelling units or allowing 2-family homes, unfortunately, those don't help to meet the requirements of Section 3A. It's got to be either allowing 3 units in a structure or 2 structures with at least 2 units, so at least 3 or 4 units on a structure. And the deadline for adopting this zoning is for Franklin is actually not until the end of 2024. That's the currently proposed deadline in the guidelines for commuter rail communities. And I guess the last thing I'll say, which I think folks probably know, is that the zoning has to be as of right. In other words, it can't require a special permit or any other discretionary approvals. It can require site plan review. But as I'm sure you know, site plan review is not sort of yes, no, but rather a review process, not a discretionary approval. So with that background, I want to ask Emma to go to the next slide. I can talk a little bit about how we did this preliminary analysis. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions about it and a lot of things that you note in here. I want to just acknowledge that this is the very first community that we've started testing out for this Section 3A, so we still have a lot to learn about it, and let's remember the guidelines are still in draft form. First, we assign each parcel in the downtown area to one of the existing zoning districts. Then we exclude parcels that are ineligible and those that are smaller than 5,000 square feet. Ineligible parcels includes, according to the guidelines, publicly owned land that is in public use. So that means a town hall or a school or a park that's in a public use is excluded. We did not exclude, and we did this using the land use codes that are in the town's assessor's data. We did not exclude any municipally publicly owned land that was classified as vacant according to the assessor, because we figured maybe that's not really in public use. So we included those. All of this, I think, we're still waiting for a little more guidance from the state, and all of these exclusions can be, sort of adjusted, and we can also include other parcels that we think are really undevelopable. But that was how we did it on this first pass. Then we made density assumptions for each one of those zones. That is the commercial zone, downtown commercial, mixed business innovation, and that general residential 5. Those are the four zones. And as you'll see, we did some where we had the same density assumptions and then some where it varied across the zones. I will note we're not held to drawing the new Section 3A zones along those boundaries, but given the timeline, this was the sort of easiest thing to produce some results for you tonight and keep the conversation moving forward. We also moved areas that are unbuildable because that is required in the guidelines. So we started with any protected open space. As we move forward and refine the analysis, we might also include wetlands or other space that can't count towards lot area under a proposed zoning district. And then we developed capacity estimates for each parcel by multiplying the zone density by the buildable area on each parcel to estimate the unit capacity. So for each individual land parcel, we say, okay, this is going to be, let's say it's half an acre and the assumed density is 20 units per acre. That would be 10 units. And we do that for each parcel, and then we can sum that up by district and for all the districts that are included. And we'll show you those results. Right after, next slide, we'll do, this is the current zoning. I think you may have seen a map similar to this before. I'm sure you know it well. So this is the part we looked at. I think there is that single family, is that the single family 4 zoning that's over to the west there? That was not included in what we did, and we didn't look at single family 4. So we really just focused on the commercial 1, downtown commercial, general residential, and mixed business innovation. We go to the next slide. For testing this out and for starting a conversation with you, we put together three different scenarios, and we're not recommending or proposing any of these, but just to show you what's involved in the analysis and to start the conversation. So one would be applying some density assumptions to all 4 of those downtown districts. Scenario 2 is we have a higher density in that downtown commercial district and a lower density in some of the other zones. And scenario 3 is that mixed business innovation, where maybe there's a much higher density in that mixed business innovation zone that would enable large-scale transformational development and lower densities elsewhere. So what do those look like? We'll start with the equal density scenario, which is on the next slide. So in this, we assumed 22 dwelling units per acre for all 4 of those zoning districts. And the map here shows the number of total dwelling units. So again, not netting out any of those that are already there. The total number of dwelling units that might be possible after, excluding certain parcels and open space and any other restrictions. The total unit capacity is just about 3,300 units here. So well over the 1,800 units that Franklin is required to zone for. Now, I will note there's a lot more nuance to be done on how much could actually be built on each parcel and how we deal with things like setbacks or odd lot sizes or other restrictions. So, I'm not saying you can take that 3,300 unit estimate to the bank, but, it gives you a sense of what the ballpark is, and you can see it's bigger for the bigger parcels and smaller for all those smaller parcels that are in, right around the train station in the downtown area. One good thing is that the gross density here passes that 15 unit per acre threshold that's in the guidelines. It's 15.5 units per acre. That's basically the area of the total of the entire of all 4 zones divided by the number of those 3,300 units, or divided into those 3,300 units, I guess. And then that little table down there, and I apologize that it's kind of small, shows you the number of units that are in each one of those zones we looked at. So commercial is just shy of 600 units. DCD, downtown commercial, is just over 500, 531. Most of them are in that general residential 5 zone, and most of those are in that parcel right there on the top right, which has actually been recently developed. And then just under 800 are in that mixed business innovation district. So conceivably, you could drop that MBI district out of there, and you would still clear the 1,800 unit threshold, presuming that there weren't too many other sort of changes that reduce your total unit capacity. The second scenario is the one where we focus higher densities downtown and lower densities elsewhere. So this is about 40 dwelling units per acre in the commercial district. And just to put that in context, that's about a 3-story building on a 1 acre parcel would that's at an FAR of about 1 would give you about 40 units per acre. And then 35 units per acre in commercial 1, 15 in that general residential, and just 10 in the mixed business innovation. Here again, we get about 3,300 units, and again, we pass that gross density. And then the third scenario is, as I mentioned before, that MBI focus, where we say, okay, what if in the MBI it's allowed at 45 dwelling units per acre, and the others are just 15 units per acre. In this case, again, about 3,300 units, just passing that density of 15 units per acre. So these are just 3 options, and maybe Emma, those are the end of my slides. Maybe we could stop screen sharing. We could see each other for the time being. But those are 3 different scenarios that we could test out now, or that we did test out, I guess. And the question for the committee and all the stakeholders is what kinds of options would the town like MAPC to pursue as we sort of refine and provide more nuance on these scenarios. What are some of the concerns folks might have? I think if we can start from sort of a vision of the way that rezoning might take place, then we can, the role of a tool like this is not to tell the town what it ought to do or to say this is the best zoning for the downtown, but rather to say, if this is the zoning vision, here's our assessment of the extent to which it will comply or fall short of the requirements of Section 3A. So again, it's not instructive. It's more of a review in order to help determine the extent to which that new zoning would help comply. So I'm interested in hearing maybe some questions folks have about the technical analysis, and more importantly, I think I and Emma are both interested in hearing a little bit about sort of what other options the committee or other stakeholders might want us to investigate, and where we should go from here.
Thank you, Kim. That was a lot of information. I do have a question about, since Franklin has 2 train stations, does that mean that we can can we spread out those units and not maybe have too much density downtown, but have more down towards the other station?
Yes, it's not in the guidelines, but HED has indicated that they will allow communities to split up the district, communities that have multiple eligible station areas, to split up the district among those station areas. So you could do that. You could do some of the units downtown and some at Forge Park.
Yeah, I know right now we're just focusing on downtown, but we could potentially say, okay, we only want to do 25% of these units down there, and then kind of change that whole, the way you plug in your information into the way you're doing it. It's really interesting. I think that helps people a lot, especially when you say, it's a 3-story building on 1 acre lot. I think that helps people. But I have a lot of questions here, so I'm going to go over to Beth, Greg.
Just a real quick question to Tim. Tim, is this based on obviously 2 stations, and if we had 1 station, would the numbers be less than the 1,800?
Yeah, great question. The way that the draft guidelines are written right now is that the town's unit capacity is based strictly on what type of service it gets and how many existing units are in Franklin right now. Commuter rail is 15%. Times the existing housing unit is the 1,800 units. So communities that have multiple stations, it's the same as if they had 1.
Thank you.
Beth?
Sure. Could you clarify, well, we have to zone for 1,800 units. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to build 1,800 units, correct?
That's right.
Right.
That's correct.
And can we already count any of the units that are in the districts already, or do they have to be new units?
Yeah, the way the draft guidelines are, and I know there were a number of comments that came in on them, so I wanna be very clear that this is the interpretation of the draft, and it's possible that HED could change it. But the way that it's written right now, it's the total capacity of the units, irrespective of how many existing homes are already there. So, forgive me, I don't know the name of the development that just went in, sort of right close to downtown, up, sort of just northeast of the train
On Dean
station.
Avenue.
On Dean Avenue, that's right.
Station 117.
Yeah, so if you rezone, obviously they just built that. They're not gonna rebuild it, but if you rezoned it for that density or higher density, you would get credit for whatever units are in the zoning, irrespective of how many units are already there. Could also rezone, equal size blank parcel, empty parcel of land, not that there's many in the area, and then that would all be net new. So they're not accounting for any of the existing units. Which, from MAPC's perspective, is a little problematic because you kind of get into a lot of games in terms of how zoning districts are drawn rather than focusing on what's best for the community and where's the best district, but that's the way the guidelines are. So it's not 1,800 net new units, and there's no requirement that the town build those. They have to be allowed as of right, but it's not a production mandate. That's very important to remember.
Thank you.
Yep,
Thanks
go
for the
ahead.
question.
Yep,
Questions.
yep. We have another meeting coming up
Right,
soon.
no, and that's what I wanted to say. I think this is a really important topic that
Yeah.
should significant more amount of time, especially when deciding how much density we want in different, I think is appropriate in different locations. And
Yes.
having a few minutes to talk about, it's probably not really something, can we have more time to discuss and digest and have more of discussion with the group here? And
Absolutely.
give direction to MAPC, I think that's really important. And then, knowing the MBTA community does not require any affordable component to it, is that something the town can actually ask for? How can we do that, or is there no provision for allowing for affordability in this?
Good question.
You're allowed to, if you were to require affordability, you're still allowed to do that. And the units are all just treated the same.
Great.
One of MAPC's comments on the draft guidelines was that communities should get extra credit for any affordable units that are required in the zoning. So they would basically kind of count extra towards that minimum unit capacity. It's not clear to me, jury's out on whether HED will take that up, but it was certainly one of our comments and many others. And I appreciate you bringing up that issue because very, very critical issue.
Great, thank you.
You done?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I think one of the things that the steering committee would like is to be able to have a chance to go over all of this with us.
Yep.
And maybe not the MAPC, just give us a chance we can discuss what we think is important to look at, and
Yeah.
and then we'll get back to you on a lot of this.
That's great. And I have a number of sort of follow-up questions because now it's like we're given all this information around what people want to see. It's all sort of colliding at the same time. It's like what people want to see, what these different scenarios can get us, and then we sort of have to mesh that all together. So
Yeah.
what sort of dimensional requirements are we thinking? And that would make sense for the areas. And then we kind of calculate what that means on units per acre basis.
Right, I think that's really important. There is a person in the audience who, Megan Benson, has a question. Do you have a question, Megan?
Hi there, yes, I do.
Could you state your name and address, please?
Yep, Megan Benson, 19 Winthrop Drive.
Thank you.
My understanding is that an MBA community doesn't necessarily have to comply with Section 3A. And if they don't, it means we're not eligible for funding from the Housing Choice Initiative, the Local Capital Projects Fund, or the Mass Works Infrastructure Program. So I'm wondering if there's a way to provide Franklin residents with, you know, the money that we receive from each of those grants. Just because I think that that's important, you know,
Yeah.
obviously based on the survey results, it's, housing was, you know, the lowest priority. And I think most of the town doesn't actually want additional housing. So, you know, what are other ways around that? Because it sounds like it's not necessarily a requirement. So I think to kind of explore that option as well. And just kind of be transparent with, you know, how much money do we, you know, rely on those, on that funding? Is it something, you know, we currently have, all of that? And then just my other, quick question was, is there a way that the MAPC could create, and I apologize if I missed this, but create another option that, you know, would kind of show like the current housing that we have, almost like if we rezoned and considered the current housing we have, would we meet that 15% requirement? So if there's a way to do that, because then, you know, that would totally change everything. If we know that we're already at 12%, if we rezoned and didn't actually have to build more, you know, if that would be an option to kind of see what we have currently and where that would put us.
I think Jamie was going to answer that, and I think probably Kim could answer that, Megan. But I think it's really important. I like your point. We should allow people to know what we will lose if we don't follow 3A, the MBT community. But Jamie wants to say something quickly, and we have to move on soon we have to adjourn soon. So thank you, Megan.
Megan, great question. This is Jamie. Really quickly, in the last year, just for example, if the town, say, was not eligible for those grant programs, we would have lost the opportunity at $2.4 million worth of received grant funds through those programs. One was a housing choice grant for $200,000 toward the Franklin Ridge Senior Affordable Complex up next to Eaton Place. And as you probably know, the $2.2 million MassWorks grant we got as a community to rebuild the lower half of Grove Street, we would have then been ineligible for. Moving in the future, we are preparing for an additional MassWorks grant for the Franklin Ridge complex, which is anticipated to be 60 units of affordable senior housing. And it's been a shovel-ready project. We're fighting with funding with our legislative and congressional delegations, and we will certainly be applying for a MassWorks grant. One other thing with housing choice, we are a housing choice community. We have been for 3 years. The most important thing, maybe out of all of that, was that when the Beaver Street Interceptor comes up, which will be in their $25 million project, because we're a housing choice community, we are not paying a 2% state revolving fund. We're paying a 1.5%, which will save hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars for ratepayers on the sewer program. So those grant programs are critical to the infrastructure of Franklin. I also just want to close out really quickly by saying, I know this is frustrating, but people have to understand a couple things. This presentation tonight will also be a part of the next council meeting. And then after that next council meeting, those are requirements we have to do by May 2nd by the state regulations. So this is not the end of the road. This is just the beginning. And I want people to really be assured that there's nothing going through next month. There are no proposals here, there, and everywhere. There's going to be a lot more community conversation around these issues. And I just think that that's really important so folks really understand this is a long conversation and a complicated one. It's not going to be rushed, and people should have a fair amount of time to have input, and as Beth pointed out, a lot of discussion around these very complicated issues. So I hope that helped, Megan. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Jamie, so much. I know Justin had his question, but we're gonna, next time, Justin, okay? Thank you, Megan. And I'll accept a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor?
Hold on, can I,
Oh,
wait, can I just go through my next steps really quickly?
no, I don't, no. I'm sorry, Emma, maybe next time.
Okay. We'll be in touch,
Thank you all.
Thank you.